I'm Krista Seiden, Analytics Advocate for Google, and also the course instructor for Google Tag Manager Fundamentals on Analytics Academy. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm also today joined by Lucas Bergstrom, who is the product manager for Google Tag Manager. So Lucas, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So we've had a ton of really great questions come into the forum for the class, and we're so excited to sit here today and answer a lot of these questions for you. But we got so many questions that we're actually going to split this out into two parts. So this is going to be part one, and then stay tuned. We'll have a part two as well to answer even more of your questions. So before we dive in, Lucas, I was hoping that you could actually lead us off with maybe a bit of a recap and overview of the migration from V1 to V2 of GTM, as well as maybe anything you can say about the roadmap.
Sure, sounds good. So if you've been using Tag Manager for a while, you're probably aware that we recently migrated everyone over from our V1 user interface over to our V2 UI. And we were looking to accomplish a few things with that. And one was just to make it easier for people to get started with Tag Manager. The other was to kind of simplify some common tasks like setting up event tracking, right? So we just kind of cut in half the number of steps that you need to do something like track clicks or form submits.
So awesome.
Yeah, and really long overdue. And we've been pleased with the response that we've gotten. So there was kind of an informal survey done, and it turned out that about 78% of people that had used both interfaces for at least a month preferred the new one, which is actually pretty good for people that have gotten used to like an older interface. So we're pleased with that. We're pleased that we're not maintaining V1 anymore. And at the same time, we are excited to roll out a bunch of new tag templates. So the theme here is you want Tag Manager to be a really vendor-neutral solution that does more for you out of the box. And what's exciting about the new tag templates is not just kind of rolling out new templates like Google Consumer Surveys, but it's how we did it. And what we did was we created an open format that lets any vendor create their own tag template and submit it to us.
So cool.
So what that means is we're no longer the bottleneck for adding new templates, and we're looking forward to bringing you a lot of new templates for the rest of the year.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Lucas, that leads me into my first question. I've seen a lot of questions in the forum, people just wondering kind of why GTM?
Right.
If they've already got GA installed on their website, what's the benefit of moving to Google Tag Manager?
Right. So probably the simplest way to think about this is, and I should say that actually the first part of the course does a really good job of covering this topic in more depth than I'll be able to go into here. But just really briefly, if you are never going to change your tracking setup, right? Maybe you're just going to put a single analytics tag on every page of your site and then never change that. Probably you don't need Tag Manager.
Right.
But if you do think that you're going to make changes, it's going to be a lot easier if you've got Tag Manager in place. Now you don't have to do that all at once, right? You can kind of, maybe leave your existing tracking setup in place, install Tag Manager, and then use that to add new stuff to your tracking setup. But eventually you're going to want to kind of move everything into Tag Manager, and for a couple of reasons, right? One is you don't want to double count anything, right? So we don't recommend kind of having some of your GA tracking in Tag Manager and some of it outside of Tag Manager, because you're probably going to shoot yourself in the foot. Right, and the other reason is that if you have all of your tracking set up in Tag Manager, then you can just kind of leverage the work that you're doing there across all your different tags.
Yep, totally. That's awesome.
Yep, so kind of as we're talking about how to get started with Tag Manager and when and why, something that a lot of people have been asking about is what's the best way to upgrade from classic analytics to universal analytics. And since I know this is something you've spent a lot of time teaching people about, maybe you could tell us?
Yeah, definitely. So if you are taking this course and learning about Google Tag Manager and you still have classic analytics on your site, this is a great time to migrate. So we actually have already upgraded everybody from classic analytics to universal analytics on the back end, but you still have to actually change the code that's on your website. So to do that with Google Tag Manager, it's a pretty simple process. What I would recommend is actually leaving your classic analytics code on the page while you get Tag Manager set up. So for example, let's say you have an analytics property on your page right now that is 12345-1. Go ahead and create a new property, 12345-2, and that's what we're going to use to test out while we set up Tag Manager. So then you'll install your new container snippet on your page with your GA page view tag through Google Tag Manager. You'll implement that tag with 12345-2, and then you'll go ahead and you'll watch Google Analytics for a while, and you'll make tweaks to your implementation until you feel comfortable that your data is at parity between the -1 account and the -2 account.
Right.
And once you're happy with those numbers and you see parity, then you can actually go ahead and remove the classic analytics code. At the same time, in Tag Manager, in your GA page view tag, change the property ID from 12345-2 to 12345-1, and that way you still have all of your historic data, but now you've gone ahead and migrated in a very safe way.
Right. So basically, you're going to have kind of two like GA tags going side by side.
Yep.
One in Tag Manager, one outside. And then once you're satisfied that the stuff in Tag Manager is working fine, you just kind of switch over completely to Tag Manager.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Lucas, that actually brings me to another question, which is, what's the best place to place the GTM code? So I think we currently recommend at the opening of the body tag, right?
Right. So yeah, so we recommend kind of the opening of the body tag for a couple of reasons. And one is the kind of earlier in the page you have Tag Manager,
Yep.
the faster it's going to load, right? And the less likely you are to like lose data, right? So on large pages that have a lot of stuff, if you've got it down at the bottom of the page, visitors that hit the page but then bounce kind of quickly, you won't count those, right? So the earlier you have GTM, the less likely you are to lose data. And we've gone to a lot of work to make sure that Tag Manager doesn't slow down the user experience, right? It fires everything asynchronously,
Yep.
so it's really not going to have a negative impact on your users. You can actually also put it inside the head if you want. It'll load even faster. The only problem is that if you're using an HTML validator, it might complain about that.
Right.
But it'll work fine.
Great. So you can have it any place, and if you have a really large container, that's not going to affect the page loading.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So that reminds me, I've actually seen a lot of questions in the forum about a synchronous tag, since we were just talking about how our container snippet loads asynchronously.
Right.
So people want the synchronous tag for reasons like A/B testing.
Right.
Do we have plans for this?
Yeah, so the reason that Tag Manager is asynchronous is because, that way, we can kind of run your rules and fire your tags and not delay the user experience. But obviously that's not going to work if you want to do something like, decide which content experiment to run, right? You need to actually be able to block the page from loading before that happens. So that requires a synchronous tag. We might do that someday. No, we're definitely going to do that before the end of the year. We know this is something that people need to do. When we do, we're still going to recommend most of the time to be asynchronous, but you'll have this option when you need it.
That's great. And since you brought up content experiments, I know we also get a lot of questions about, do we have something in GTM for content experiments in particular?
Right. Yeah. So we don't actually have anything kind of for web-based content experiments right now, right? And part of that is the technical limitation of being asynchronous.
Right.
You can run these things side by side. So you can do GA content experiments at the same time you've got your Tag Manager container on the page. And yeah, so that'll work fine. And we know that this is something that's important to people. So yeah, it's an area we'll keep working on.
Great.
So I guess as we're talking about kind of how to set up Tag Manager, right, and like how to where should the snippet go, right? Like what kind of snippet do I want? Some people have asked, kind of more basic questions, which is, I'm not just a single user deploying stuff on my website. Let's say I'm an agency, right, and I've got dozens of clients. In that case, can you say anything about like how they should think about using Tag Manager and what's going to be different?
Yep, totally. So, at a very basic level, it's the same, right? You're still going to build out your tags in a similar manner. I think the real difference actually comes when you talk about managing all of those accounts at scale if you're an agency. Right. And I know that we've done a lot of things to make this easier for agencies. So, for example, we actually have an API for GTM. And I think we were the first tag management system out there to come out with an API, and that really makes it very scalable for agencies to create their tags and their containers and really scale out what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think on top of that, we also have import and export functionality, which helps you if you have a lot of similar businesses that you're creating containers and accounts for, to go ahead and import and export those containers and reuse them across a lot of places. So I think we do a lot of things that help you scale in those ways.
Yeah, and would you say, how about setting up accounts? Are agencies gonna, should they have kind of like one account and then one container per client, or should they have, multiple accounts?
That's a good question. I think we generally recommend that you have one container per website or per client. But let's say that you're a business with 40 different websites. But all of those websites are actually the same site structurally. Maybe they're just different localized versions of that content. In that case, you could actually go either way. You could have one container for all 40 websites. And you could manage sending data to the right property through a lookup table variable. Or you could have 40 different containers for all of those websites, but that could get a little heavy to manage. So in that case, I may actually recommend just one container for all of your websites. But it really depends on the setup and what you're trying to get out of it and how different the different websites are.
Got it. Okay. So I guess to kind of summarize that, it seems like you kind of have one account kind of like per company, right? And then, the question of how many containers you have really depends on how many sites you've got.
Exactly.
So so if you're an agency, you're going to have a bunch of different accounts you're working with, because each one of your clients will have their own account, and then you can use things like the API to really automate how you manage it. Okay.
Totally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So Lucas, let's switch gears a little bit. We have a lot of questions and people eager to know more about GTM for mobile. So what's the main difference between GTM for desktop and for mobile? And are there any things that we've covered in the course that are desktop only?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So the first thing I should say is that all the core stuff that people learn during the course, right, like what tags are, triggers, variables, how those things work together, all that stuff still applies in a mobile world. There are a couple of key differences, and the first one is, in the mobile world, we don't have kind of any predefined triggers for you, right? So we don't have predefined triggers for things like, there's no page load in a mobile world, right? We don't have like a click trigger, and that's due to kind of some technical limitations of how tracking in apps works. So for mobile apps, you actually have to push an event to the data layer, right, every time something interesting happens. Right? That's the only way that Tag Manager is going to know that something interesting happened in your app. So that's kind of the first thing that people should be aware of. The second thing people should be aware of is it's a little bit less dynamic in an app world, in the sense that if you want to deploy a new third-party kind of service using on the web side, you can use a new tag template or paste something into a custom HTML tag. If you want to use a new third-party SDK for mobile apps, right now you have to actually make sure that you ship your app with that SDK. Right? Because we can't ship down that SDK binary for you, and those are kind of the two main differences.
So I guess a follow-up to that then is, are we developing any kind of an official plugin for things like Cordova or PhoneGap? And also, what's the best way to test mobile apps, considering the diversity of the different versions of phones and operating systems? Right.
So this isn't the first time I've heard the request for some kind of Cordova or PhoneGap integration. Unfortunately, it's something we're not likely to do, at least in the near term. Right. It's possible that maybe a third party will develop something like that, but I'm not really sure. The thing I'd say about testing. We give you some tools to do that, right? So we give you the ability to kind of get a preview link, right, for your container, so that you can, kind of click this link on, on a smartphone or on a tablet, right, and then you can open up your app running that preview version of your container, before it's actually published live to the world. So that's the first thing people should be aware of, right? And as always, we kind of recommend previewing your changes before you push them live. What we don't give you in the app world is we don't give you that nice kind of debug overlay right, on top that shows you which tags are firing, right, how your rules are
No
being...
preview pane in mobile.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, if that's not enough, right, and you need kind of like more detailed information, we recommend using a proxy, like something like Charles Proxy.
Yep.
And what that does is it lets you kind of see like what requests are coming from your phone, right, what's going out over the network, and that gives you kind of really like fine-grained like, understanding about, which tags are actually firing with what data.
Yeah, definitely. And with that preview link, you could actually send that data to a test profile in Google Analytics and watch it come in through real time.
Yep.
And that way you can ensure that the data is coming in as you would hope and expect.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Nice.
So we actually just got pretty technical, which seems like kind of a good pivot to ask you, how much development experience do you think people need in order to get started with Tag Manager?
I think that's a great question. One of the things that I love about Google Tag Manager so much is that I really, really believe that it can span an organization and that it can offer so many different people across the organization the ability to impact what's going on in a website. Mm-hmm. So as you guys have seen in this course, it's actually pretty easy to get started and to set up a GA page view tag or event tracking. And that's something that can really be up-leveled out of development and engineering to other teams like ops or marketing or even sales, depending on the types of tags that you're doing. But if you do need to get more technical, if you have much more of a robust implementation in mind, you probably still will need help of a developer or an engineer.
Yep.
And certainly to get started with getting that code on your page, to get the data layer and the container snippet set up, you'll need somebody to help you get that code actually inserted and launched.
Yep.
So I think my answer really is that it spans the spectrum, and that you can get started pretty easily without a lot of technical knowledge, but that GTM really gives you the opportunity to kind of bring data-driven decisions and analytics and tag management to every area of the organization. I think it's a really, really great tool for that.
Cool.
So I think that kind of wraps up part 1 of our Google Tag Manager Fundamentals Q&A session. Thank you guys all so much for the great questions. As I mentioned earlier, we have so many questions that we're actually going to host a part 2, so stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, there's a lot of other great resources for you guys to find answers. So the forum is still a really great place. Keep asking and answering a lot of great questions there. And also, I'd recommend checking out our other Analytics Academy courses. There's a lot of great ones there, such as Digital Analytics Fundamentals or Platform Principles.
Yep.
You can also follow and read the Google Analytics blog.
Right.
That's a great one.
Yep.
And I also have a blog. It's bloggerchica.com. And I blog about GA and GTM quite a bit.
Yep. And there are some social media accounts that people can check out too if they want kind of more frequent updates, right? It's like...
Yeah, so you can follow Google Analytics on Google Plus at Plus Google Analytics, or on Twitter at Google Analytics. Yep. I'm on Twitter at Krista Seiden, and I believe you're on Twitter at Lucas B, right?
Yep, totally.
Yep. So again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and happy tagging.
Yeah.